Marcus Daniels was a man who had achieved what many thought was impossible. Born and raised in a small working-class neighborhood, he grew up hearing stories of struggle and resilience from his parents, both of whom worked tirelessly to give him a better life. From an early age, Marcus knew he wanted to make a difference. He wasn't just smart, he was determined. After excelling in school and earning scholarships, he went on to study criminal justice at one of the country's top universities. His hard work paid off when, years later, he became the youngest ever director of the FBI, a position that made headlines across the nation. But tonight, as Marcus stepped off a long international flight, none of that mattered. He was tired, jet-lagged, and ready to go home. The summit he had attended in Europe had been exhausting, days filled with speeches, panel discussions, and meetings about how to improve law enforcement practices around the world. Marcus had spent hours talking about fairness, accountability, and trust between communities and police forces. Now, all he wanted was to get back to his family, take a hot shower, and sleep for 12 straight hours. As he walked through the bustling airport terminal, Marcus felt invisible. People rushed past him, dragging suitcases or chatting loudly on their phones. Dressed casually in jeans, sneakers, and a dark hoodie, he blended into the crowd. His usual sharp suits and polished shoes were packed away in his luggage. He hadn't expected anyone to care what he looked like after such a grueling trip. Besides, it wasn't like anyone would recognize him here. Even though his face had been on magazine covers and news programs, most people didn't pay attention unless they were looking for someone famous. What Marcus didn't know was that tensions were running high back home. In recent weeks, there had been several high-profile incidents involving allegations of racial profiling by local police officers. Protests had erupted, social media was ablaze with outrage, and community leaders were calling for sweeping reforms. Law enforcement agencies were under intense scrutiny, and officers were feeling the pressure. Some were defensive, others frustrated, and a few genuinely worried about how to rebuild trust with the communities they served. At the same time, two rookie police officers, Tom and Ryan, were patrolling the airport. Both were relatively new to the force, having graduated from the academy only 6 months earlier. They were young, eager, and still figuring out how to handle the complexities of their job. Tom, the more outspoken of the two, often joked about wanting to catch the bad guys, while Ryan preferred to stay quiet and observe. Neither of them had much experience dealing with real-world situations outside of training exercises and ride-alongs with senior officers. Their shift at the airport was supposed to be routine: keep an eye out for suspicious activity, assist travelers, if needed, and maintain order. But the atmosphere was tense. Everyone, from airport staff to passengers to fellow officers, seemed on edge. Rumors of potential protests or disruptions had circulated earlier in the day, though nothing concrete had materialized. Still, Tom and Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something might happen. It was this heightened sense of alertness that made them hyper-vigilant and, ultimately, reckless. Meanwhile, Marcus reached the baggage claim area. He glanced at his phone, which had died somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, cutting him off from emails, texts, and calls. Normally, he hated being unreachable, but tonight, he welcomed the silence. For once, he could simply exist without the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. As he waited for his suitcase to appear on the carousel, he adjusted his belt, slightly. It had been digging into his side during the flight. It was an ordinary gesture, something anyone might do without thinking twice. However, from across the room, Tom noticed the movement. At first, it didn't register as anything unusual. Then his mind started racing. The man adjusting his belt looked casual. Too casual. And was that a bulge near his waist? Could it be a weapon? Before he could second-guess himself, Tom nudged Ryan and pointed toward Marcus. "See that guy?" he whispered urgently. "Something's off." Ryan squinted, trying to assess the situation. "You sure?" he asked hesitantly. He didn't see anything particularly alarming, but Tom's confidence gave him pause. After all, they were supposed to trust their instincts, right? If they missed something, if they let a threat slip by, The consequences could be catastrophic. Without waiting for further discussion, Tom strode over to Marcus, his hand resting on the grip of his holstered gun. Ryan followed close behind, unsure whether to feel nervous or reassured by his partner's decisiveness. When they reached Marcus, Tom cleared his throat loudly. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice firm but not yet aggressive. "Could you please step aside for a moment?" Marcus turned, surprised. He took in the badges clipped to their uniforms and nodded politely. "Of course," he replied, stepping away from the crowd. "Is there a problem?" Tom studied him carefully. Up close, the man seemed harmless enough, clean-cut, well-spoken, and calm. Yet something about him still felt wrong. Maybe it was the hoodie, or maybe it was the way he carried himself, not arrogantly but with a quiet confidence that made Tom uneasy. Whatever it was, Tom decided to press forward. "Sir, can I see some identification?" he asked. Marcus frowned slightly, but complied. "I'm afraid my ID is in my checked bag," he explained patiently. "It should be coming around on the carousel any minute now." He gestured toward the slowly rotating luggage belt. Ryan exchanged a glance with Tom, who seemed unconvinced. "We'll wait," Tom said curtly. But as the seconds ticked by, his suspicion only deepened. Why didn't this guy have ID on him? Wasn't that suspicious? And why did he seem so unfazed by their presence? Unbeknownst to Marcus, the officers' minds were already jumping to conclusions. To them, every detail, the hoodie, the missing ID, the belt adjustment, was adding up to a dangerous profile. Their training told them to act quickly, to neutralize potential threats before they escalated. What they failed to consider, however, was the role their own biases were playing in the situation. For Marcus, the encounter felt surreal. One moment, he was just another traveler trying to get home. The next, he was standing under the harsh, fluorescent lights of the airport surrounded by two increasingly hostile officers. He tried to reason with them, offering explanations and remaining calm despite the absurdity of the situation. But no matter what he said, it seemed to fall on deaf ears. And so, as the minutes dragged on, Marcus found himself caught in a nightmare he never could have anticipated. Little did he know this was only the beginning of a story that would soon capture the attention of the entire nation. As Marcus stood there trying to explain himself to the two officers, the situation began to spiral out of control. Tom, the more aggressive of the two, wasn't satisfied with Marcus's calm responses. Every word Marcus spoke seemed to make Tom more suspicious, as if he were deliberately hiding something. Ryan, on the other hand, hovered awkwardly behind his partner, unsure whether to trust his instincts or follow Tom's lead. The tension between them was palpable, and it only grew worse with each passing second. "You say you're waiting for your bag, but we can't just take your word for it," Tom said sharply, his tone escalating. "What's in the bag? And why don't you have any ID on you?" Marcus sighed inwardly, doing his best to remain patient. He knew how frustrating it could be when people didn't cooperate during routine checks. He'd dealt with similar situations countless times in his career. But this felt different. There was an edge to Tom's voice that went beyond professional caution. It was almost as though he had already decided Marcus was guilty of something, even before asking all the questions. "My ID is in my suitcase," Marcus repeated calmly. "I'm not carrying anything dangerous. I'm just trying to get home after a long trip. If you'd like, I can show you my badge once my luggage arrives." Tom's eyes narrowed at the mention of a badge. "A badge? You're claiming to be law enforcement?" he asked skeptically. His voice dripped with disbelief, and Marcus could see the doubt written all over his face. "Yes," Marcus replied evenly. "I'm the director of the FBI. My name is Marcus Daniels. You can verify that once my bag comes through." For a moment, there was silence. The words hung in the air, heavy and surreal. Marcus expected some kind of reaction, a flicker of recognition, maybe even an apology. But instead, Tom let out a short, incredulous laugh. "The FBI director? Right, sure you are," he scoffed, shaking his head. "Nice try, buddy." Ryan shifted uncomfortably beside him, glancing around the crowded baggage claim area. A few nearby travelers had started to notice the commotion and were watching curiously. Some pulled out their phones, no doubt ready to record whatever happened next. The last thing either officer wanted was to end up on social media looking incompetent, or worse, abusive. "Look, sir," Tom continued, his voice rising slightly. "If you really are who you say you are, then prove it. Show us your credentials now. Otherwise, we're going to have to detain you until we figure this out." Marcus felt a surge of frustration, but kept his composure. He gestured toward the carousel again, which was still slowly rotating with no sign of his suitcase. "I've already told you, it's in my bag. I can't produce it out of thin air." But Tom wasn't listening anymore. His mind seemed made up. To him, Marcus's explanation sounded evasive, his calm demeanor suspicious. In his head, the pieces fit together perfectly. The hoodie, the lack of visible ID, the claim to be someone important. It all added up to one conclusion, that Marcus was lying. "Hands where I can see them." Tom barked suddenly, stepping closer. Marcus froze, startled by the sudden shift in tone. He raised his hands slowly, palms open, hoping to diffuse the situation. But Tom wasn't interested in calming things down. He reached for his handcuffs, snapping them onto Marcus's wrists with practiced efficiency. The sound of metal clicking into place echoed loudly in the busy terminal. Gasps rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. People whispered to each other, pointing phones in Marcus's direction. For a man used to commanding respect and authority, this moment felt surreal and deeply humiliating. Here he was, the highest-ranking official in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, being treated like a common criminal in front of dozens of strangers. Marcus tried one last time to reason with the officers. "This is a misunderstanding," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the absurdity of the situation. "You're making a huge mistake. Call your supervisor. Verify who I am. This doesn't need to go any further." But Tom ignored him, too caught up in his own certainty to entertain the possibility that he might be wrong. "Save it for later," he snapped, gripping Marcus's arm tightly. "Let's go." Ryan hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the turn of events. He glanced at Marcus, then at Tom, torn between loyalty to his partner and the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. "Maybe we should wait for his bag," he suggested quietly. "Just to be sure." "No." Tom shot back, cutting him off. "We're not taking any chances, not today." As they led Marcus away from the carousel and toward a secluded holding area, the murmurs of the crowd grew louder. Someone shouted, "What's going on?" Another voice called out, "Why are they arresting him?" Phones clicked and flashed, capturing every detail of the scene. Marcus kept his head high, refusing to let the situation break him. But inside, he was seething. How could this happen? How could two rookie officers fail to recognize him or at the very least listen to reason? The walk to the holding area felt endless. Marcus's mind raced with thoughts of what would come next. Would someone intervene before it was too late? Would these officers realize their error before causing irreparable damage? Or would this ordeal drag on, turning into yet another example of systemic bias and mistrust? Unbeknownst to Marcus, help was already on the way. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a seasoned investigator assigned to oversee rookie patrols, had been alerted to the disturbance at the baggage claim. She arrived just as Tom and Ryan were about to push Marcus into a holding room. Her sharp eyes took in the scene immediately. The handcuffed man, the nervous officers, and the growing audience of onlookers. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Tom stammered an explanation, but Sarah barely listened. Her gaze locked onto Marcus, and recognition dawned instantly. Her jaw dropped, and she froze for a split second before stepping forward. "Do you know who this is?" she asked, her tone sharp and incredulous. When neither officer responded, she pulled out her tablet and brought up Marcus's official FBI profile. "This is Marcus Daniels," she said, showing them the screen. "The director of the FBI. Do you understand what you've done?" The color drained from Tom's face while Ryan looked like he might throw up. They stared at the photo on the tablet, then back at Marcus, finally seeing the truth they had missed earlier. The weight of their mistake hit them like a freight train. For Marcus, the revelation came too late to erase the sting of indignity. But as the officers realized the enormity of their error, the dynamics of the situation shifted dramatically. What happened next would leave everyone involved, including the bystanders watching intently, questioning everything they thought they knew about justice, prejudice, and accountability. Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood there, her tablet in hand, staring at the two officers with a mix of disbelief and fury. The screen displayed Marcus Daniels' official FBI profile, his photo, his title, and even a brief biography that left no room for doubt about who he was. Her voice, sharp and commanding, sliced through the tense atmosphere like a knife. "Do you understand what you've done?" she repeated, enunciating each word slowly, as if speaking to children who had just broken something irreplaceable. "This is Marcus Daniels, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You've arrested him, handcuffed him, because of what? A hoodie? A missing ID card?" Tom, the more vocal of the two officers, opened his mouth to respond, but found himself at a loss for words. His face turned crimson, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air of the terminal. Ryan, standing slightly behind him, looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Both men glanced at Marcus, their earlier bravado replaced by sheer panic. Marcus, still cuffed and standing quietly, took it all in with a mixture of emotions. He felt anger, yes, a deep, simmering frustration at how easily these officers had dismissed him based on superficial details. But there was also pity. He saw fear in their eyes now, the kind of raw, unfiltered terror that came from realizing you had made an unforgivable mistake. It wasn't satisfaction he felt. It was exhaustion. How many times would this happen? To him, to others who didn't have the privilege of being recognized or vindicated so quickly. Sarah wasted no time. She stepped closer to Tom and Ryan, her presence dominating the space. "Remove the cuffs now," she ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. When neither officer moved immediately, she barked again, louder this time. "I said now." Ryan fumbled with the keys while Tom stood frozen, his hands trembling as he tried to process the enormity of the situation. Finally, the cuffs clicked open and Marcus lowered his arms, rubbing his wrists where the metal had dug into his skin. He didn't say anything. Not yet. Instead, he simply looked at the officers, his expression unreadable. The crowd around them had grown larger, drawn by the spectacle unfolding before their eyes. Phones were held high, recording every second. Some people whispered among themselves, shaking their heads in disbelief. Others muttered angrily, criticizing the officers for their actions. A few clapped when they realized Marcus was innocent, cheering for justice served or at least acknowledged. Sarah turned to address the gathering crowd, raising her voice so everyone could hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Director Marcus Daniels of the FBI. There has been a misunderstanding and I assure you it will be handled appropriately." Her words were professional, but her glare toward Tom and Ryan spoke volumes about her personal feelings on the matter. Tom finally found his voice, though it cracked under the weight of his guilt. "Sir, we didn't know. We thought—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Ryan chimed in weakly. "We were just doing our job." Marcus raised a hand, silencing them both. For a moment he considered letting his anger loose, tearing into them for their incompetence and bias. But he chose another path, one that reflected the values he had spent his career upholding. Taking a deep breath, he spoke calmly but firmly. "You say you were just doing your job," Marcus began, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "But let me ask you this. Whose job is it to recognize when your assumptions are clouded by prejudice? Whose responsibility is it to question whether those assumptions are fair or dangerous?" His words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Tom and Ryan exchanged a glance, their faces pale. They knew they had no defense, no excuse. Their training should have prepared them for moments like this, to pause, to think critically, to avoid jumping to conclusions. Instead, they had allowed fear and bias to take control. Sarah stepped forward again, addressing the officers directly. "Your lucky Director Daniels is a man of integrity," she said, her voice laced with disdain. "Because if he weren't, this could have ended very differently, for all of us." She gestured toward the crowd, many of whom were still filming. "Do you realize what this looks like? Do you understand the damage this does, not just to yourselves, but to the entire department?" The officers nodded mutely, unable to meet her gaze. Tears welled up in Ryan's eyes, and Tom's jaw clenched tightly as he fought back his own emotions. They knew they had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. As the gravity of the situation sank in, something unexpected happened. Without warning, Tom dropped to one knee, then the other, bowing his head in front of Marcus. Ryan followed suit a second later, mirroring his partner's posture. Both men knelt there, their caps in their hands, looking utterly defeated. "We're sorry, sir," Tom choked out, his voice breaking. "We didn't mean it. Please forgive us," Ryan added, his words tumbling out in a rush. "We'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Just tell us what to do." The sight of two grown men kneeling in desperation was surreal and uncomfortable. Marcus stared at them, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to walk away, to leave them stewing in the consequences of their actions. But another part of him saw an opportunity, an opening to teach, to challenge, to push for change. For a long moment, no one spoke. The terminal fell silent except for the hum of distant conversations and the occasional beep of machinery. Even the crowd seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting to see what Marcus would do next. When he finally broke the silence, his voice was steady but filled with conviction. "Get up," he said simply. "Kneeling won't fix this. What will fix this is action. Real action." Tom and Ryan hesitated for a beat before scrambling to their feet, their movements awkward and hurried. They stood there, shoulders hunched, awaiting judgment. Marcus continued, his tone firm but measured. "I'm not going to lie to you. This hurts. It hurts because it reminds me of how far we still have to go. But I'm also not here to destroy your careers. That wouldn't help anyone. What I want is for you to learn from this, to understand why this happened, and why it can never happen again." Sarah nodded approvingly, stepping aside to give Marcus space. She knew better than to interrupt him now. This was his moment to lead, to turn a shameful incident into a lesson that might resonate far beyond this airport. Turning to address the crowd, Marcus raised his voice slightly. "To everyone watching, let this be a reminder. No one is above accountability. Not me, not these officers, not anyone. Mistakes will be made, but what matters is how we respond to them. Let's use this as a chance to reflect, to grow, and to demand better from ourselves and from our institutions." The crowd erupted into applause, some people cheering loudly while others wiped away tears. It was clear that Marcus's words had struck a chord, not just with the officers involved, but with everyone present. In that moment, he wasn't just the FBI director. He was a symbol of resilience, grace, and hope for a better future. As the applause died down, Marcus turned back to Tom and Ryan. "I'll decide what happens next," he said. "But for now, go home. Think about what you've done, and tomorrow come ready to make things right." With that, he walked away, leaving the officers standing in stunned silence, and the crowd buzzing with awe. The ordeal wasn't over, but it had already sparked a conversation that would ripple outward, challenging perceptions and inspiring change. As Marcus walked away from the scene, his footsteps echoed softly against the polished airport floor. The weight of what had just happened pressed heavily on him, but he carried himself with the same quiet dignity that had defined him throughout the ordeal. Behind him, Tom and Ryan remained rooted to the spot, their faces pale and their bodies rigid with shame. They looked like statues, frozen in time, unable to move or speak. It was as if they were afraid that any action, no matter how small, might make things worse. Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood nearby, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She watched Marcus go, her expression a mix of admiration and concern. She knew this incident would have repercussions far beyond the airport terminal. This wasn't just about two rookie officers making a catastrophic mistake. It was about the systemic issues within law enforcement that allowed such mistakes to happen in the first place. And now, thanks to the dozens of phones recording the scene, the entire world would soon know about it. The crowd around them began to disperse slowly, though many lingered, whispering among themselves. Some approached Sarah cautiously, asking questions about what they had witnessed. "Is that really the FBI director?" one woman asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. Another man chimed in, his tone angry. "How could this happen? How could they not recognize him?" Sarah answered as diplomatically as she could, explaining that it had been a misunderstanding, a terrible one, but a misunderstanding nonetheless. Still, she couldn't ignore the undertone of frustration in people's voices. Many of them weren't just upset about Marcus. They were upset because they saw themselves, or someone they loved, in his place. What if it had been their son? Brother, father, or friend? Would they have received the same apology? Or would the story have ended differently? Meanwhile, Tom and Ryan finally found the strength to move. Their initial shock gave way to a crushing wave of guilt. Tom leaned against a nearby pillar, his hands gripping it tightly as if trying to steady himself. His breathing came in shallow gasps and his eyes darted around wildly, searching for something, anything, that might offer relief from the suffocating weight of his mistake. Ryan sank into a nearby chair, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook slightly, though whether from fear, exhaustion, or tears, it was hard to tell. For both men, the reality of what they had done was beginning to sink in fully. They hadn't just embarrassed themselves or their department, they had humiliated one of the most powerful figures in American law enforcement. Worse still, they had done so in front of an audience that included journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens who were already skeptical of police practices. Neither officer dared to look at each other. The camaraderie they had shared earlier, in the shift, the easy banter, the sense of partnership was gone, replaced by an awkward silence filled with unspoken accusations. Had Ryan tried harder to stop Tom? Should Tom have trusted his gut when something felt off? These questions swirled in their minds, compounding their guilt. Back in the terminal, Marcus finally reached a quiet corner where he could collect his thoughts. He leaned against a wall, closing his eyes briefly as he exhaled deeply. Despite his outward composure, he felt drained, physically, emotionally, and mentally. The cuffs may have been removed, but the memory of them lingered, a stark reminder of how quickly power dynamics could shift. He thought about the officers kneeling before him begging for forgiveness. Part of him wanted to dismiss their pleas as insincere, an attempt to save face rather than genuinely seek redemption. But another part of him recognized the raw vulnerability in their actions. They weren't just apologizing to him, they were apologizing to themselves for failing to live up to the standards they had sworn to uphold, for letting bias cloud their judgment, for losing sight of the humanity of the person standing in front of them. Marcus opened his eyes and glanced at his watch. It was late and he was exhausted, but he knew this wasn't the end. News of the incident would spread quickly, fueled by social media posts and eyewitness accounts. By morning, it would dominate headlines across the country. People would debate the implications, dissect every detail, and draw conclusions, some fair, others less so. As much as he wanted to retreat into privacy, he knew he couldn't afford to stay silent. Just then, Lieutenant Sarah Chen approached him. Her demeanor was calm but apologetic, her usual confidence tempered by the gravity of the situation. "Director Daniels," she said softly, "I can't begin to express how sorry I am for what happened here tonight. Those officers, they're young, inexperienced, but that's no excuse. We'll handle this appropriately, I promise." Marcus nodded, appreciating her sincerity. "Thank you, Lieutenant," he replied. "I believe you mean that. But let's be clear, this isn't just about those two officers. It's about the culture that allows moments like this to happen. If we don't address the root causes, it will keep happening. To me, to others, to anyone who doesn't fit someone's narrow definition of safe." Sarah nodded solemnly. "You're right. and I assure you we'll take steps to ensure this doesn't happen again. Training, accountability, transparency. We'll do whatever it takes." Before Marcus could respond, a young woman approached hesitantly. She held out her phone, which displayed a video of the arrest. "Excuse me, sir," she said timidly. "I recorded everything. I thought you should see it and maybe share it. People need to know what happened." Marcus took the phone and watched the footage. It was surreal seeing himself through someone else's lens. The calm explanations, the handcuffs snapping shut, the growing tension. He handed the phone back to the woman and thanked her. "You're right," he said. "This needs to be seen. Not to shame anyone, but to spark a conversation. A real conversation." With that, Marcus made a decision. Instead of retreating into anonymity, he would embrace the moment. He turned to Sarah and requested access to a secure room where he could prepare a statement. Wordlessly, she led him to a nearby office, ensuring he had privacy while arranging for communication staff to assist him if needed. Once alone, Marcus sat down and began drafting his message. He wrote carefully, choosing each word with precision. He acknowledged the pain and frustration caused by incidents like this, not just for himself, but for countless others who faced similar treatment without the luxury of vindication. He called for reforms, emphasizing the importance of training, accountability, and empathy. And he ended with a challenge. Let us use this moment not as a reason to divide, but as an opportunity to unite, to demand better, not just from our institutions but from ourselves. By the time he finished, dawn was breaking outside the airport windows. Exhaustion tugged at him, but there was also a flicker of hope. Yes, the night had been difficult, even devastating, but it had also revealed the potential for growth, for change. As Marcus stepped out of the office, ready to face the cameras and the public, he reminded himself of why he had chosen this path in the first place. Justice wasn't just about catching criminals. It was about creating a world where everyone could feel safe, respected, and valued. And if sharing his story could help move society closer to that goal, then every second of discomfort would be worth it. When Marcus emerged from the secure room, the airport terminal had transformed into a scene resembling organized chaos. News crews had arrived in full force, their cameras and microphones set up in strategic positions to capture every detail of the breaking story. Reporters huddled together, whispering urgently as they prepared for what promised to be one of the most significant press moments in recent memory. The officers involved, Tom and Ryan, had been whisked away by Lieutenant Sarah Chen, likely to face internal questioning and disciplinary measures. Meanwhile, the crowd that had gathered earlier had only grown larger, fueled by curiosity and outrage. Marcus took a deep breath before stepping forward. He knew this moment would define not just his response to the incident, but also the broader conversation about systemic bias within law enforcement. This wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever felt marginalized, dismissed, or mistreated because of the color of their skin, the clothes they wore, or the assumptions made about them. As he approached the makeshift podium, the noise around him faded slightly, replaced by an anticipatory silence. "Good morning," Marcus began, his voice calm yet commanding. "I want to thank all of you for your patience as we worked through the events of last night. What happened here at the airport was deeply troubling, not just for me personally, but for our community and our nation." The reporters leaned in, hanging on his every word. Some scribbled notes furiously while others adjusted their camera angles to ensure they captured his expression. Marcus paused briefly, allowing his words to settle before continuing. "I am standing before you today not as a victim, but as someone who believes in the power of accountability and growth. Last night, 2 rookie officers made a grave mistake. They acted on assumptions rather than facts, allowing implicit bias to guide their decisions. While I understand that mistakes can happen, especially under pressure, this particular error underscores a much larger issue, one that affects countless individuals across this country every single day." The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding emphatically. Others exchanged knowing glances, clearly connecting Marcus's experience to incidents they had witnessed or endured themselves. A young woman near the front raised her hand tentatively, and Marcus gestured for her to speak. "Director Daniels," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "how do you feel? How does it feel to be treated well, like you're less than who you are?" Marcus smiled faintly, appreciating the sincerity behind her question. "It's a fair question," he replied. "And honestly, it hurts. It hurts because it reminds me that no matter how far I've come, no matter what title I hold, there are still people who will see me first as a black man and judge me accordingly. That's painful. But what's even more painful is knowing that so many others don't get the chance to explain themselves, to prove who they are. For them, these kinds of encounters often end in tragedy." His words resonated deeply with the audience. Heads bowed in reflection and several people wiped away tears. Marcus let the moment linger, giving everyone time to process the gravity of his statement. Then, he continued, "But here's the thing. Pain can be a catalyst for change. If we choose to confront it, if we use it as motivation to demand better, we can create something meaningful out of even the darkest moments. That's why I'm choosing not to focus solely on the actions of those two officers. Instead, I want us to look at the bigger picture. Why did this happen? How can we prevent it from happening again? And most importantly, how can we build trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve?" At this point, a reporter from a national news outlet stepped forward. "Director Daniels," he asked, "what do you think needs to change within police departments to address issues like racial profiling?" Marcus nodded thoughtfully as if expecting the question. "Training is critical," he said, "but it's not enough to simply teach officers how to de-escalate situations or recognize bias. We need to rethink the way we recruit, train, and evaluate officers. We need to prioritize empathy and cultural competence alongside tactical skills. And we need robust systems of accountability, systems that hold officers responsible when they fail to uphold the values we expect from them." He paused, scanning the faces in front of him. "Let me be clear. The vast majority of officers are good people who genuinely want to protect and serve, but good intentions aren't enough. We have to create environments where bad decisions are caught early, addressed constructively, and used as learning opportunities, not swept under the rug." Another reporter chimed in, asking whether Marcus planned to pursue disciplinary action against the officers involved. His response was measured but firm. "That's not my decision to make," he explained. "What I will say is that I believe in second chances for everyone. Those officers made a terrible mistake, but they also showed genuine remorse. I'm willing to give them the opportunity to learn and grow, provided they commit to making meaningful changes in their approach to policing." This answer elicited a mix of reactions. Some in the audience clapped approvingly, moved by Marcus's willingness to extend grace. Others frowned, clearly skeptical that leniency was the right move. Marcus acknowledged both perspectives, emphasizing that forgiveness and accountability weren't mutually exclusive. "As for me," he added, "I plan to use this platform to advocate for reforms, not just in policing, but in all areas of society where bias exists. Because the truth is, this isn't just a law enforcement issue, it's a human issue. And until we confront it head-on, we'll continue to see division, mistrust, and injustice." The press conference lasted nearly an hour, with Marcus fielding questions ranging from policy specifics to personal reflections. Throughout, he remained composed, thoughtful, and unwavering in his commitment to progress. By the time he concluded, the room was buzzing with energy, a mixture of admiration, determination, and hope. As Marcus stepped away from the podium, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. Sharing his story hadn't erased the sting of the previous night's events, but it had given them purpose. People were listening. Conversations were starting. Change, however incremental, felt possible. Lieutenant Sarah Chen approached him once more, her expression softer now. "You handled that beautifully," she said. "Thank you for being willing to turn this into something positive." Marcus smiled faintly, though his eyes betrayed lingering fatigue. "It's not about me," he replied. "It's about all of us. If we can take this moment and use it to push for real, lasting change, then maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to look back on this someday and see it as a turning point. With that, Marcus gathered his belongings and prepared to leave the airport. As he walked toward the exit, he couldn't help but notice the looks people gave him, some curious, others respectful, a few still skeptical. But there was one constant. They were watching, observing, listening. And that, Marcus realized, was exactly what he had hoped for. Change didn't happen overnight, and it certainly didn't happen without attention. By stepping into the spotlight, by refusing to let the incident fade into obscurity, he had ensured that the conversation would continue. That alone made everything worthwhile. As he climbed into a waiting car, Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of rest. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but he was ready. After all, he had spent his entire life fighting for justice. This was just another chapter in that journey, a reminder that even the highest-ranking official wasn't immune to the struggles faced by so many others. And perhaps, in sharing his story, he could inspire others to share theirs, to stand up, speak out, and demand a better future for everyone. In the days that followed, the incident at the airport became a national talking point. News outlets dissected every detail, replaying video footage of Marcus Daniels being handcuffed and later addressing the crowd with his powerful message. Social media erupted with hashtags like Justice for All and Bias Exposed as people shared their own stories of discrimination and called for systemic change. The story wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It had become a symbol of the broader struggle against prejudice and inequality. For Tom and Ryan, the two rookie officers involved, life felt like it had been turned upside down. They were placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation, their faces splashed across newspapers and television screens, alongside headlines questioning their judgment. Friends and family reached out to offer support, but the weight of public scrutiny was crushing. Both men spent sleepless nights replaying the events in their minds, haunted by the knowledge that they had failed, not just Marcus, but the principles they had sworn to uphold. Their commanding officers arranged mandatory counseling sessions and additional training focused on implicit bias, cultural sensitivity, and de-escalation techniques. At first, Tom resisted, convinced that no amount of training could undo the damage he had caused. But over time, he began to see these sessions not as punishment, but as an opportunity to grow. Ryan, who had always been quieter and more introspective, threw himself into the process wholeheartedly. He read books, attended workshops, and even volunteered at a community center to better understand the perspectives of those he served. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Sarah Chen worked tirelessly to restore trust between her department and the community. She organized town hall meetings where residents could voice their concerns directly to law enforcement leaders. These gatherings were often tense, with emotions running high, but Sarah remained committed to fostering open dialogue. "We can't fix what we don't acknowledge," she told the crowd during one particularly heated meeting. "So let's acknowledge our mistakes, listen to each other, and work together to build something stronger." Marcus returned to his duties as FBI director, but the experience at the airport stayed with him. It reinforced his belief that leadership wasn't just about making decisions from a position of authority. It was about using your platform to drive meaningful change. In the weeks after the incident, he spearheaded initiatives aimed at improving police-community relations nationwide. One program focused on creating mentorship opportunities between seasoned officers and rookies, emphasizing empathy and accountability. Another initiative encouraged departments to adopt body cameras and transparent review processes to ensure accountability. At a civil rights conference several months later, Marcus delivered a keynote speech that drew widespread acclaim. Standing on stage before a packed auditorium, he reflected on the night at the airport and how it had shaped his perspective. "That moment taught me something profound," he said, his voice steady and resonant. "It taught me that even someone in my position isn't immune to systemic racism. But it also reminded me why I chose this path, to fight for fairness, justice, and equality." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "I could have walked away angry. I could have demanded severe consequences for those officers. Instead, I chose to extend grace, not because I condoned their actions, but because I believe in second chances. And I believe that true change happens when we confront our flaws honestly and commit to doing better. The audience erupted into applause, some standing to cheer. Among them were activists, law enforcement officials, and ordinary citizens, all united by a shared desire for progress. As Marcus stepped off stage, he was approached by a young black man who introduced himself as a college student studying criminal justice. "Director Daniels," the student said, his eyes shining with admiration, "your story gives me hope. It makes me think maybe I can make a difference too." Marcus smiled warmly, shaking the young man's hand. "You absolutely can," he replied. "Change starts with people like you, people willing to step up, speak out, and lead with integrity. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Back home, Marcus found solace in the simple joys of everyday life. He spent evenings playing board games with his children or cooking dinner with his wife, grateful for the love and support that grounded him. Yet, even in these quiet moments, he couldn't escape the responsibility he felt to keep pushing forward. Every email he received from someone sharing their story, every letter praising his courage, and every critique challenging him to do more fueled his determination to stay engaged. As months turned into a year, tangible changes began to take root. Police departments across the country adopted new training programs inspired by Marcus's advocacy. Community organizations partnered with law enforcement agencies to host joint events, bridging gaps and building trust. While the work was far from finished, there was a growing sense of momentum, a collective recognition that progress, though slow, was possible. Tom and Ryan eventually returned to active duty, though under close supervision. Their colleagues noticed a shift in their behavior. They were more cautious, more empathetic, and more willing to ask questions rather than jump to conclusions. During a routine traffic stop one afternoon, Tom found himself face to face with a nervous young driver who reminded him of Marcus. Taking a deep breath, he spoke calmly, explaining the reason for the stop and listening patiently to the driver's explanation. When the encounter ended peacefully, Tom felt a small flicker of redemption. Ryan, meanwhile, became a vocal advocate for reform within his department. He joined a task group dedicated to reviewing policies and procedures, ensuring they aligned with principles of fairness and transparency. His transformation earned him respect among his peers, many of whom admitted they had underestimated him before. For Marcus, the most rewarding part of the journey was seeing how his experience had sparked conversations that transcended borders, professions, and backgrounds. People from all walks of life were coming together to demand accountability and justice, not just for themselves, but for future generations. It was proof that even the darkest moments could illuminate paths toward a brighter future. One evening, as Marcus sat on his porch watching the sunset, he reflected on everything that had transpired. The arrest at the airport had been humiliating, infuriating, and exhausting. But it had also been transformative, not just for him, but for countless others who saw themselves in his story. He realized then that leadership wasn't about avoiding challenges. It was about facing them head-on and using them to inspire growth. As the sky painted itself in hues of orange and pink, Marcus felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead would still be long, filled with obstacles and setbacks. But he knew that as long as people refused to stay silent, refused to accept injustice, and refused to give up, change was inevitable. And that thought, that unwavering belief in humanity's potential, was enough to keep him moving forward one step at a time.